Here we go. It's been a while since I've uploaded a video, but we finally kind of got one finished. I've been doing a lot. Moved and changed locations, and so hopefully this year we'll be getting a lot more videos going on. But this is one of my last Gasland builds. I had it filmed, and I finally kind of had the chance to get around and finish it up. And so this one right here is using a street sweeper. I believe it was Matchbox. It was a Matchbox street sweeper, and I took a resin cast of a skull you can see here. And I'm making kind of, I don't know, little speakers or something that would be coming out of the skull, just to give it a little bit more interesting things. It's just like aluminum rods. And so we do one for every hole, and I have the holes going around the top of the head, as you can see here. And so it's just a really technical kind of fit, just trying to fit it into getting the right drill bit, getting the right drill size, and getting it in there, and hoping it'll stick. I did that, I think, 5 or 6 around the head of that skull, and it came out really kind of cool. As you can see, here's another one, just marking where we need to cut. And then use a tube cutter. You can pick those up at Home Depot or any hardware store, really, down the plumbing aisle. They have them. They're great. They have a little kind of X-Acto blade that's a circle, and you just rotate that aluminum wire inside of that little tool, and it just snips it right off. And so we've got 2 down. We're at the top of the head, and skipped ahead so you can see a little super glue. And gluing it right in, and then we take a smaller aluminum rod just to give it a little bit more texture and depth instead of having one stick out. Having one inside of it, it just adds another level of coolness. And at this time, I wasn't really sure if I wanted flames coming out of there, but I was thinking about flames coming out of there, and it looks like a little exhaust port. And one of the things I wanted to do with this street sweeper, you can see there's 2 circles right on the front of that street sweeper, and a lot of people will just take blades and start basically just make it like a weapon on the front. And I wanted to kind of go against the grain there, and I didn't want to do something that I've seen done 1,000 times. And so that's what kind of got me thinking about the skulls, and that skull started looking like speakers, and from there it just went on. And so I 3D printed a couple speakers. I got those off of Thingiverse. I went and 3D printed a stack of speakers, and we've got kind of a little pace car war rig. And I think when I ran this on the season, I ran it as an ice cream truck, but it was one hell of an ice cream truck, I'll tell you that. And we're making the platform for the speakers to sit on right now, just out of an old gift card. I always save the gift cards. They're just like such great plastic. And so you can see here is where I decided to get rid of those things in the front. I just didn't want it to look like a street sweeper. I didn't want to go with the flow, and what everybody was doing was they were throwing little blades on those. Like, that just seemed like it's been done, and I wanted to do something a little fresh and a little different. And I kind of like the absurdity of this tiny little vehicle with these huge speakers stacked on top of them, and kind of this metal kind of pace car. I don't know how many times I've flipped this around. The chassis on this, along with that little thing that sits, is almost exactly the same, and so it's really hard to find out how that car goes back together once you have that chassis off. But we got it. And so now we're using a 5-minute epoxy to get these bars on, and I think I actually had to do this twice. The bars came off initially, just because I was handling this car so much. It was a complicated build. It took a while to do this one, quite a long time actually, just because there were so many little tiny nuances that I wanted to kind of figure out and do the details on. This is the first time I glued the skull on. The skull actually did come off the first time, and I had to glue it on again. There wasn't much, as you can see right there. There's a lot of gaps, not much for that glue to grip on, and so that's why it was a pain in the butt to get to stick. And so after that, what I needed, since we have the speakers, you got to have a guitar player on the front. And obviously the 172 scale, there's not that many guitar players out there. And so I had to kind of MacGyver my own. And this was a modern military figure that I cut the arms and the head off of. And you can see I screwed in a little bit of a hole on the shoulder blades, and I screwed in a hole on those arms and a hole on the head. And I took some aluminum wire and glued aluminum wire into those, the head and the arms. And from there, I glued the arms back onto the body, as you'll see in a minute. What that allowed me to do is pose this guy. It added a little bit of articulation to him. And there we are. You can see just getting the head back on. And there were some gaps. I wasn't too concerned with the gaps on the head because I was going to sculpt a little bit of a cloak on him to make him look like a Grim Reaper. And so there's a little bit of a gap, but I wasn't too concerned with that. And same with these guys. I knew that there was going to be a gap in the arms and that wire wasn't going to sit flush, but I was okay with that because I knew I was going to be sculpting over this guy. My main concern was to be able to get him into a pose that looks like he was playing a guitar. At this point, I hadn't even thought of how to even sculpt a guitar yet. I was just worried about getting this guy to the pose of the guitar. As you can see there, he was. And we're taking Procreate Putty and adding a coat to him now. And I did this the similar way I did this with my very first Gaslands build, the Grim Reaper. I'll link to it up in the corner here, right there. And if you want to see kind of a little bit more about Procreate, I talk about it a little bit there, but it's a 2-part epoxy that you put together, and it's kind of the consistency of a saltwater taffy candy, and it's great for clothes. As you can see here, he actually looks like a flowing robe, and it's stiff enough that you can actually bend it up a little bit and make it look like it's catching the wind. And so here we're doing the hood. The hood is very simple. It's just you lay it out on a card, flatten it out, and you cut a triangle, and then you put the middle of the triangle right on the top of the guy's head, just like that. Make sure it sticks, and then you take your tool, and I dip it in a little bit of Vaseline just to give it a little bit of lubrication, or else it'll stick to that Procreate. And then you just kind of fold it down and let it fold naturally down into the head and onto the shoulders, and it drapes really well. It drapes just like fabric, and you're lucky enough to make it look like a Grim Reaper. As you can see on that right hand side, you see it. This is after it's cured. It actually looks like it's blowing in the wind with this little guy. He's relatively small, really small. There he is, the Grim Reaper. We not perfect, but in the scale, he's like 172 scale, so he's really small, and so these little tiny imperfections that the camera might pick up don't really get picked up by the naked eye. Once he's painted, he'll be looking just fine. And so now we're working back on, as that epoxy cured, or the 2-part epoxy cures, we're back to the speakers. I painted them up black and using toothpicks to kind of create a little bit of a platform for them to make it not just look like a piece of cardstock sitting there. I'm adding a little bit of detail to make it a little more interesting. And 2-part epoxy, we did some spikes straight up, and then on top of those toothpicks that are straight up, I put some aluminum tubing over the toothpick, so now it looks like it's almost like an intake or muffler system. And this is pretty much how I made the guitar. I made a little hook on aluminum wire, and I took a piece from a model kit. This was a small airplane. It was the intake over one of the engines on the small airplane on a model kit, and I just clipped it off, and it looked like basically looked like our guitar. So I kind of lucked out there that I had that model plane laying around, a little piece there, and that clip looked it off. And as you can see here, there he is, kind of just test fitting how it's going to look. And I was actually pretty happy with the way it looked. Now on the top, these little smokestacks, I wanted to make some flames, and so flames are really easy. Just some hot glue, and you kind of drag the hot glue up the toothpick, and that will make it look like some flames. And then you know once the hot glue dries, obviously you paint them yellows and reds, and it'll look like flames coming up. After that, we've kind of got it a little bit more assembled. I painted off camera, and I'm making a little bit of a roll cage or a cage inside of it now. And this is just, again, some aluminum wire, and I'm just kind of wrapping the aluminum wire and getting it to that there's actually a guy inside of that cockpit, and so I'm giving him a little bit of a cage inside the cockpit, and then epoxy those inside of the cage, and the driver is secured. After that, I turned it upside down, and what we're going to need to do is, instead of it just looks like it was sitting there right now, and so I wanted to make it a little more interesting, so I cut up some more toothpicks to make it look like it's being held up by wood. It just really laying the toothpicks down and not really caring how messy it looks. Again, this Gasland aesthetic is one for messy and just kind of a rush job, so that's kind of what I was going for, stacking those toothpicks up to make it look like they've been reinforced and reinforced again. After all is said and done, you paint it up, and there it is. That's kind of what we looked like at the end. You've got the most metal street sweeper in all of Gaslands. It's a pretty insane build. It was really fun, and it gets a lot of attention on the table, so